In 661, a powerful man named Grimoald tried to seize the Frankish throne from the Merovingian dynasty. He was executed. 90 years later, his descendant Pepin did the exact same thing, deposed the king, took the crown, and then nobody objected. Not a single sword was drawn. What changed? The answer is one of the most brilliant long-term political strategies in European history, and it involved monks, a desperate pope, and a very carefully worded letter. To understand why Pepin succeeded where Grimoald failed, we need to understand what the Carolingians were up against and what they spent 90 years building. The Merovingians didn't rule because they were competent. By the 7th century, most were figureheads. They ruled because Frankish society believed their bloodline was sacred, rooted in pre-Christian mythic origins. Their long uncut hair was a physical symbol of this power. You couldn't just beat them in battle. You had to replace the idea that made them kings. This is the concept of legitimacy, the accepted right to rule, not just power, but the belief that power is rightfully held. Legitimacy can rest on many foundations: election, military triumph, dynastic succession, divine sanction. The Carolingians, as mayors of the palace, chief ministers who held real governing power, had de facto control, but they lacked de jure authority. They needed a new foundation. Now shift to Rome. Right? The Pope held enormous prestige, guardian of the relics of Saints Peter and Paul, bearer of the ancient title Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. But in practice, he was besieged. The Lombards had invaded Italy in 568 and were squeezing papal territory from every direction. The Byzantine Empire, the Pope's traditional protector, was distant, weakening, and increasingly hostile. The emperor in Constantinople had launched iconoclasm, a campaign to destroy religious images that put him at odds with Rome. By the 720s, the Pope was looking north for a new ally. The alliance that formed was a transaction. The Carolingians offered the military muscle. The papacy offered the one thing that could trump Merovingian blood, God's endorsement. But how did this alliance actually work on the ground? It wasn't sealed in a single treaty. It was built through decades of monastic activity. Irish monks had a tradition called peregrinatio, wandering as spiritual exile, leaving home as penance, embracing the randomness of God's world. Anglo-Saxon monks combined this itinerant spirit with Benedictine organizational structure, the rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasized stability, hierarchy, and discipline. Together, these monks fanned out across the Frankish countryside and into unconverted Germanic lands east of the Rhine. They converted populations, founded monasteries, and built institutional networks. And one man stood at the center of it all: Saint Boniface, the apostle to the Germans. English-born, he converted populations in Holland and central Germany and reformed the Frankish Church. Boniface served both masters simultaneously. The Carolingian mayors of the palace wanted to expand eastward and consolidate control. Boniface's missions extended their reach. The papacy wanted to spread Christianity and extend its authority. Boniface delivered new populations loyal to Rome. He was the living bridge between the two powers. By the 740s, all the pieces were in place. Now watch how Pepin played his hand. Pepin the Short, Charles Martel's son, had spent years cultivating the church, encouraging Boniface's reforms, restoring church lands, convening councils of bishops, positioning himself as Christianity's guardian in Francia. Then, at what may have been Boniface's own instigation, Pepin sent a letter to Pope Zacharias with a question so perfectly framed, it could only have one answer. Is it right for the man who holds the power not to wear the crown, while the person who wears the crown does not hold the power? The Pope, who needed Pepin's army desperately, replied that it was wrong, and this wasn't a genuine inquiry. It was political theater, a carefully staged piece of legitimation. In 751, Pepin had himself elected king of the Franks. The last Merovingian king was tonsured. His long hair, the symbol of his dynasty's sacred power, was cut off, and he was placed in a monastery. The old magic was literally sheared away. 2 years later, in 753, something unprecedented happened. Pope Stephen II crossed the Alps and traveled to Francia. No pope had ever visited Northern Europe before. This was a measure of his desperation and of how completely the geopolitical center of gravity was shifting. Stephen crowned Pepin personally, sealing the new dynasty's legitimacy with the highest possible Christian authority. In return, Pepin led a Frankish army into Italy and defeated the Lombards, giving the Pope the military breathing room he needed. The deal was complete. The papacy had turned away from the Eastern Mediterranean, from Byzantium, from the old Roman world, and toward the northern Transalpine protector. This was a civilizational pivot. Now return to our opening parcel. Grimoald in 661 had military power but no alternative legitimacy framework. He tried to seize the crown by force, and the Franks rejected him because the Merovingian mystique was still intact. Pepin in 751 had spent generations building a replacement. Christian sacred authority, papal endorsement, monastic networks, church reform. By the time he asked his question, the answer was already a foregone conclusion. The lesson, raw power isn't enough. You need a story that people accept. What happened in 751 to 753 wasn't just a change of dynasty. It was a fundamental reorientation of European civilization. The alliance between the Frankish monarchy and the Roman papacy would define European politics for centuries. It led directly to Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in 800, Pepin's own son crowned by the Pope in Rome, reviving the title of Roman Emperor in the West. It led to the Holy Roman Empire. It established the intertwined relationship between church and state that shaped the entire medieval period, and it all traces back to a 90-year strategy. Monks building networks, mayors of the palace cultivating the church, and a pope who crossed the Alps because he had nowhere else to turn. The Carolingians didn't just replace a dynasty, they replaced an entire series of why kings get to be kings. The Merovingians ruled because of who they were, their blood, their hair, their Massic ancestry. The Carolingians ruled because of what they did while protecting the church, expanding Christendom, receiving God's blessing through the Pope. That shift from inherited sanctity to earned church-endorsed sanctity is one of the most consequential ideas in Western political history. It redefined the relationship between power and authority for centuries, and it was built not with armies, but with monks, letters, and patience. Legitimacy is never inherent, it's always constructed. The Merovingians had it once, a sacred aura so powerful that even incompetent kings held the throne for generations. The Carolingians dismantled that aura and built a new one, brick by brick, monastery by monastery, reform by reform. When Pepin finally asked his famous question, the real answer had been written decades before he ever sent the letter.